In the town of Tarnopol lived a man by the name of Reb Fievel. One day, as he sat in his house, deeply absorbed in his Talmud, he heard a loud noise outside. When he went to the window, he saw a lot of little pranksters. Up to some new piece of mischief, no doubt, he thought. "Children, run quickly to the synagogue," he cried, leaning out and improvising the first story that occurred to him. "You'll see there a sea monster, and what a monster! It's a creature with 5 feet, 3 eyes, and a beard like that of a goat, only it's green." And sure enough, the children scampered off, and Reb Fievel returned to his studies. He smiled into his beard as he thought of the trick he had played on those little rascals. It wasn't long before his studies were interrupted again, this time by running footsteps. When he went to the window, he saw several Jews running. "Where are you running?" he called out. "To the synagogue," answered the Jews. "Haven't you heard? There's a sea monster there, a creature with 5 legs, 3 eyes, and a beard like that of a goat, only it's green." Reb Fievel laughed with glee, thinking of the trick he had played, and sat down again to his Talmud. But no sooner had he begun to concentrate when suddenly he heard a dinning tumult outside. And what did he see? A great crowd of men, women, and children, all running toward the synagogue. "What's up?" he cried, sticking his head out of the window. "What a question! Why, don't you know?" they answered. "Right in front of the synagogue there's a sea monster. It's a creature with 5 legs, 3 eyes, and a beard like that of a goat, only it's green." And as the crowd hurried by, Reb Fievel suddenly noticed that the rabbi himself was among them. "Lord of the world!" he exclaimed. "If the rabbi himself is running, then surely there must be something happening. Where there's smoke, there's fire." Without further thought, Reb Fievel grabbed his hat, left his house, and also began running. "Who can tell?" he muttered to himself as he ran, all out of breath, toward the synagogue. Once upon a time there lived a pious man who had 3 daughters. The first one was a thief, the second was a sluggard, and the third was a liar, who never spoke the truth and who slandered people whenever she had an opportunity. One day a pious man who had 3 sons came to the city and said, "You have 3 daughters, and I have 3 sons. Let us make a match between them." But the father of the girls said, "Let me alone. My daughters are not good enough for your sons, for each one has a vice." The father of the boys asked, "What are their vices?" And the other replied, "One is a thief, the second is a sluggard, and the third is a liar." The father of the boys asked, "Have they no other vices than these? If so, I will cure them. Leave it to me." So they were betrothed, and he took the damsels with him and married them to his sons. As soon as the weddings were over, he gave to the thief the keys to all his money, and satisfied her greed so that she had no reason to steal. To the second he gave men-servants and maid-servants in plenty, so that she should have nothing to do. And as to the third, he fulfilled all her wishes, so that she should not tell lies or slander anybody. And whenever the father-in-law left her house, he embraced and kissed her, for he hoped that by being good to her, he would cure her of her evil quality, and she would not carry on slander any more. One day the father came to see how his daughters were getting on. So he went to the first one and asked her how she was getting along with her husband and how she was treated by her parents-in-law. She replied, "I thank you so much, Father, for having given me in marriage to this man, for I have everything that my heart desires. And moreover, I have all the keys in my hand so that I do not have to steal." Then he went to the sluggard and asked her how she was getting on. And she also said, "I am so thankful to you, Father, for having brought me here, for I need not lift a hand. I have men-servants and maid-servants in plenty, and my husband and parents-in-law all treat me very well." Then he came to the daughter who told lies to ask her how she was getting along, and she said, "You are a fine father. I thought you gave me 1 husband, but it seems you gave me 2, the father and the son. For no sooner does my husband leave the house than my father-in-law comes in and kisses me and hugs me and wants me to do his will. Dear father, if you do not believe it, come tomorrow morning and you will see it is true." Next morning the father came and she put him in a room where he could see what was going on. Her father-in-law came as usual, and kissed her and embraced her and said to her, "My dear daughter-in-law, how are you getting on? Is there anything you want?" He did all this with the good intention of curing her of her vice, but her father, who saw it, grew furious and rushed out of his chambers and killed him. Then he tried to get away, but when her 2 brothers-in-law came home and found their father lying dead, they killed their father-in-law. Then the slanderer began to shout, "Murder! Murder!" and they understood it was through her that the tragedy had occurred. So they killed her too, and thus, through slander, 3 persons lost their lives. Therefore did Rabbi Huna say, "The sin of the evil tongue is greater than the 3 sins, murder, adultery, and theft combined." In a certain Polish village there lived a Jewish tenant farmer. He was a plain man, had no learning, but he made up for it in piety and in good deeds. His father before him had worked the same little farm, and the landowner, a friendly old man, had lived on good terms with both father and son. The peasants of the countryside liked this upright tiller of the soil. They entrusted him with many of their affairs. When he went to town, which was often, they had him make purchases for them there. One day, a young nobleman arrived in the village. He had wasted his patrimony in wine, women, song, and card-playing. Now he found himself without any means. Therefore he fell upon the idea of displacing the Jew on his farm and to work it himself. "It will be an easy matter to get rid of him," he told himself. "After all, he's a Jew, and am I not a nobleman?" But things didn't go as easily as he had expected. The landowner explained to him that he had no right to consider his proposal. Hadn't the Jew taken over the farm from his father? He paid his rent on time and in full. Why then should he take his farm away from him and leave him without bread? What the landowner didn't tell the nobleman was that he did not trust him, for he saw that he was light-headed and irresponsible. But the young nobleman didn't give up so easily. At first he tried to reach his goal in a friendly way by asking the Jew to leave the farm out of his own free will. When he saw that the Jew was stubborn and refused to oblige him, he began to threaten him with direst misfortunes. What wouldn't he do to him? He'd incite the peasants against him. That wouldn't be too hard, wasn't he a Jew? He'd inform the authorities that certain things were not in order. He'd induce the village priest to forbid the peasants from having any dealings with him, and a lot of other things. But all these threats had no effect. The Jew did not allow himself to be intimidated. On the contrary, he went about telling everybody in the village of the nobleman's threats. Thereupon, both the peasants and the priest assured him that they would ignore the rascal. Foiled in this, the nobleman conceived a devilish plan. One day, as the Jew was on his way to town in his wagon, his enemy, by means of money, drink, and wheedling, induced several peasant youths to wait in ambush for him in the forest through which he had to pass. Unaware of the danger that awaited him, the Jew got through with all his business in town, and, as dusk descended, he started on his journey home. The sky was overcast and it rained steadily. By the time the Jew reached the forest, night had descended. He allowed his horses free rein, for he could not see one step ahead of him. Then an uneasiness fell on him. To drive away the gloom, he began to recite the psalm. "God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear, though all the earth be removed, and though the mountains be carried into the midst of the sea." He repeated this psalm over and over again, yet the forest continued to stretch, ominous and black, all around him. The horses seemed to have lost their way and wandered aimlessly in the dark. The Jew's uneasiness grew steadily. With increasing verve he chanted the psalm ever louder in order to still his fear. "God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble." A thing like this had never happened to him before in his life. Times without number his horses had crossed the entire length of the forest, one could say almost blindfolded, so well they knew the way. How could he now explain the fact that they had lost their way? At last the dawn broke. The Jew at last saw where he was, and found the road back to his farm. The young nobleman waited impatiently for the return of the peasants he had engaged to waylay the Jew. Hour after hour passed, but no sign of them. When midnight came and still he had not heard from them, he grew very uneasy. The devil alone knew what had happened. Who could tell? Maybe the Jew had stood up to the peasants and got the better of them. Worse yet, he could have gone and revealed everything to the authorities. Again, it was even conceivable that these rogues of peasants had betrayed him. Stung to a frenzy by these thoughts, he got a horse and wagon and galloped off into the woods. A thick darkness, like that which fell on Egypt under Pharaoh, lay all about him. He couldn't find his way. Suddenly he felt a rain of blows descending on him. Several dark figures had leaped upon him, gave him even no time to cry out. They belabored him so lustily that he lost his voice. When his attackers finally wearied of their exertions, he managed to find his tongue. It was then that they realized their mistake. When the Jew finally reached home, he found that all in the village had already heard what had happened, and were splitting their sides laughing. The young nobleman was taken to a hospital. After that, he didn't dare show his face in the village for fear of being laughed at. No matter how much he achieved in the world, Alexander still remained dissatisfied. I would like to experience something most unusual that no human being before me has ever experienced, he cried. So he ordered his hunters to capture a number of eagles. He chose the largest among them and sat himself astride on it. Then he speared a piece of flesh on his lance and raised it high. As soon as the eagle smelled the flesh, it rose up in the air, straining to reach it. Purposely, Alexander held the flesh out of the reach of the eagle, who rose ever higher and higher into the air. Soon the towns and cities began to look like pinpoints to the king. Alexander was filled with vainglory. "Who can compare to me now?" he gloated. "I am now higher than all men. In my eyes now they look like insects." But suddenly fear gripped him. He thought, if I am so high up, how can people see me? Maybe I also look like a fly to them. Perhaps they don't see me at all, and if I am out of sight, how can they do me honor? Soon they may even forget me. And all his pride burst, and his uniqueness seemed as nothing to him now. And still the eagle kept soaring, farther and farther from the earth. Once more Alexander looked down, and the earth now seemed to him like a little ball. The king grew frightened, and he lowered his lance with the flesh on its point. Straining to reach it, the eagle began to descend ever lower and lower. Soon objects became distinct, ever larger and larger, towns, trees, and people. And then nearer he came, people grew bigger and bigger to his eyes, and Alexander rejoiced and derived the right moral from it. When he reached the ground again, he ordered a sculptor to fashion a portrait of him, holding a small sphere in his hand. "Let people know," spoke the king, "that even the mighty Alexander can look as insignificant as this tiny sphere." After he had conquered the entire world, Alexander started back on his journey home to Macedonia. On the way he came to a stream. He dismounted, and taking out some salted fish he carried in his knapsack, he began to rinse them in the water before eating. At this a remarkable thing happened. Upon touching the water, the fish became alive. Filled with amazement, Alexander threw himself into the stream and bathed in it. "Now I understand," he cried, overjoyed, "that the water in this stream flows from paradise. I will wash my face quickly in it, and then I'll follow the stream, for it's sure to lead me to paradise." Barely had he finished washing his face when his eyes began to shine like stars, his face became radiant, his energies renewed. Never before had he felt so happy. Quickly he went up to the gates of paradise, but he found them closed. "Open up, gates!" he cried out. "Alexander wants to enter." Instantly the answer came. "These are the gates of the eternal. Only the pious may enter here." Seeing that the gates would not open for him, he implored, "Give me some kind of token, O heavenly gates, so I can prove that I've been here." At this the gates of paradise relented and opened for an instant. A human eye then rolled toward him. Amazed, Alexander picked it up and placed it in his knapsack. Then he made his way home to Macedonia. No sooner had he reached home when he called all his wise men together. He told them everything that had happened to him. "What signifies the strange gift I received?" he asked. "O king," replied the wise men, "place the eye in the scales and weigh it." "What for?" asked Alexander. "I can tell you beforehand that it weighs but little." "Do it just the same," the wise men urged. "In the other half of the scales place a gold piece. Then we will find out which is heavier." Alexander did as they asked. To his surprise, he found that the eye was heavier than the gold piece. He threw into the scales another gold coin. Still, the eye was heavier. He then threw in a whole handful of coins and ordered that all his gold and silver and jewels be thrown in. Still, the eye outweighed the treasure. "Even were you to take all your chariots and horses and palaces and place them in the scales, the eye will still be heavier," said the wise men. "How do you explain this?" asked the king. "How is such a thing possible?" "Learn a lesson from this, O king," said the wise men. "Know that the human eye is never satisfied with what it sees. No matter how much treasure you will show it, it will want more and still more." "Your explanation doesn't satisfy me. Give me proof," insisted Alexander. "Very well," agreed the wise men. "Have all your gold and treasure removed from the scales. Then place a pinch of dust in their place and observe what happens." Barely had Alexander placed a little dust in the scales when they tipped to the other end, for the dust proved heavier than the eye. "Now I understand the meaning of your words, and of what was in your minds," cried Alexander. "So long as a man is alive, his eye is never sated, but no sooner does he die when he is as dust. Then his eye loses its impulse and becomes powerless. It can no longer desire." After Noah had completed the building of the ark, the animals were gathered together near it by the angels appointed over them. They came in pairs, and Noah stood at the door of the ark to see that each one entered with its mate. As soon as the waters of the flood rose upon the surface of the earth, the children of men hid themselves in their homes for safety. All traffic and business ceased, for the angel of death was abroad. This state of affairs caused Falsehood to realize that henceforth there was no chance of her plying her trade. Was it not quite evident that the ever-increasing waters of the flood would soon sweep away the wicked folk who had rebelled against their heavenly Creator? Where should Falsehood betake herself for safety? She hastened to the ark, but its door was shut. What was to be done? Falsehood knocked at the door with trembling hand. Noah opened the window of the ark and put out his head to see who was knocking. It was a strange creature before the door. Noah had never seen her before, because he was a righteous man who never told lies. "What do you want?" he cried. "Let me in, please," she replied. "Gladly," cried Noah, "would I admit you, if your mate were with you, for only pairs are admitted here." In grief and disappointment, Falsehood went away. She had not gone a few yards before she met her old friend Wickedness, who was now out of employment. "Where do you come from, dear friend Falsehood?" asked Wickedness. "I come," said Falsehood, "from old Father Noah. Just listen. I asked him to let me come into the ark, but he refused unless I complied with his rules." "What does he require?" asked Wickedness. "The good old man stipulated that I must have a mate, because all the creatures admitted into the ark are in pairs," Falsehood replied. "Now, dear friend, is this the truth?" queried Wickedness with a merry twinkle in his eye. "Of course it's the truth, on my word of honor," rejoined Falsehood. "Come now," she added, "will you be my mate? Are we not just fit to be joined together, two honest and poor creatures?" "If I agree," said Wickedness, "what will you give me in return?" Falsehood thought a while, and with a cunning look at her friend, she exclaimed, "I faithfully promise to give to you all that I earn in the ark. Have no fear, I shall do excellent business even there, because I feel very fit and energetic." Wickedness agreed to the terms immediately, and there and then a proper agreement was drawn up, and duly signed and sealed. Without further delay, they both hastened to Noah, who readily admitted the happy pair. Falsehood soon began to be very busy and earned good money, and thought of her agreement with Wickedness with regret, as she realized that she alone did all the business. She even said to him one day, "Look here, how easily I can carry on my trade single-handed." Wickedness merely reminded her of the agreement, and day by day he wrote down in his ledger the sum total of the day's takings. At the end of the year, for the flood lasted 12 months, they came out of the ark. Falsehood brought home much treasure, but Wickedness came with her and claimed the whole of the hard-earned fortune. Thereupon Falsehood said to herself, "I will ask my mate to give me some of my earnings." She approached Wickedness and in a gentle voice said, "Dearest friend, please give me a share of what I have so honestly earned, for I alone did all the work." Wickedness looked at her in contempt and with harsh voice cried aloud, "Your share is nothing, cheat! Did we not solemnly agree that I was to take everything which you would earn? How could I break our agreement? Would this not be a very wicked thing to do?" Falsehood kept her peace and went away, well knowing that she had been foiled in her attempt to cheat her friend Wickedness. True indeed is the proverb, "Falsehood begets much, but wickedness takes it all away." Thank you for listening. Please don't forget to like and subscribe.